Helmet is a band who never did things the way they were supposed to. From rejecting the idea of having an edgy rock and roll image to frontman and guitarist Paige Hamilton getting a very traditional music education. The media and music industry labeled them as the next Nirvana. Even 20 record labels battled to sign the group, with Helmet nabbing a whopping $1 million advance. Today, let's talk about the rise of Helmet and their much beloved record Meantime. Helmet's formation didn't follow the typical formula of two childhood friends starting a group together. Instead, frontman and guitarist Paige Hamilton has always very much been the leader of the group, and he never set out to be a rock star. The band's songs sound like a stop-and-start sledgehammer, featuring odd time signatures and guitar tunings. Hailing from Medford, Oregon, which Hamilton referred to as a typically redneck town of 25,000, his dad ran a motel. One of his early jobs was working at the local logging mill and fruit orchard. He told Rolling Stone, "I was just a really nice little small-town geek who wanted to play baseball and football." He told the LA Weekly that the first band that really spoke to him was the Monkees, then it was the Eagles. After that, he told Rolling Stone, "I obviously started playing the guitar because of rock music. Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, Led Zeppelin, that's all I listened to. I don't see it as that far removed from Sonic Youth or Big Black." He remarked how for Christmas his parents got him 2 Rod Stewart albums, one of which he traded in for Led Zeppelin 4. He cited Led Zeppelin 4 and the opening track Black Dog as inspiring him to get his first guitar, a cheap $40 acoustic flat top, in his senior year of high school. In high school, he attended Lane Community College, and it was here that he played one of his first bands, an eclectic cover act named Twist and the Ups. They covered songs by artists like Joe Jackson and The Clash. Hamilton told the News Times, "I was writing some original, sort of weird avant-garde fusion stuff," adding, "Our drummer wanted to stand on his drum throne and recite from the Communist Manifesto at frat parties. We were just having fun." It was in his first year of post-secondary school, Hamilton got heavily into jazz, citing John Coltrane and Miles Davis as his biggest influences. He forgot about that 70s era rock for a while that he was into as a high schooler. He soon met 2 professors, one of which taught philosophy and the other who taught literature, who helped him develop as a songwriter. He told the News Times, "They encouraged me to write. Obviously, it was a literature class. We were writing poetry and things like that. As I started messing around with words more than I had in the past, I always sort of wrote stuff down in a little traveling notebook that I carried around." Hamilton soon enrolled into the University of Oregon, but he struggled throughout his first term, getting a 1.9 GPA in his first year. It was a graduate student jazz guitarist who convinced Hamilton to pursue music as a career. They taught Hamilton the importance of space in music. He told the News Times, "They turned me on to the use of space in my playing. They said, you don't have to play out everything you know every time you pick up the guitar." Hamilton soon earned a degree in jazz and classical guitar. Adding to the Chicago Tribune, "I began to feel that rock was limited and that jazz had a real language." Of course, Hamilton's parents had other plans for their son, hoping that he'd become a professional like a lawyer or doctor, and he told Rolling Stone that his parents weren't exactly thrilled when he told them he wanted to become a musician. By 85, Hamilton moved across the country to New York to further pursue his musical education, getting a master's degree in jazz guitar at Manhattan School of Music. He had missed out on a lot of the punk bands of the 70s, and he vaguely knew who Johnny Rotten was. He lived on the outskirts of Harlem and was excited to be in the same city that his musical heroes like John Coltrane and Miles Davis once lived in. It was both of them who also taught him the importance of song structure. In between school, he worked as a limousine driver, a bartender, and even worked at the Clinton Arms Hotel on 99th and Broadway. While working the night shift at the hotel, he bore witness to some bizarre events, telling the Village Voice, "We had a guy hit another guy in the head with an axe over a girl, and we had a fire break out when a guy fell asleep with a lit cigarette." He also had an early morning altercation with an ex-convict who wore women's panties on his head, adding, "He was scary too, could have torn my head off." He soon met and played with avant-garde guitarist and composer Glenn Branca, who Sonic Youth's Thurston Moore and Lee Ranaldo played with as well. Hamilton was one of 10 electric guitarists who appeared on Branca's 1989 recording Symphony No. 6. He briefly also played in a Brooklyn band called Pros and Cons, who wrote and recorded music but never actually played a gig. He later played in a Wall of Sound group called Band of Susans, also appearing on their record Love Agenda and playing some concerts with them. But there was friction over his song ideas not being taken seriously, telling the Chicago Tribune, "I want to do something that had the density of Sonic Youth, but with more rhythmic intensity and more intricate ensemble playing. That led him to forming Helmet in 1989. It was during his time in New York that Hamilton was also exposed to the noise rock and punk scene that expanded his musical mindset. But at the same time, he also saw similarities to his earliest rock influences, telling Rolling Stone it was all open-tuned guitars playing these incredibly simple rhythms and different time signatures. That was the environment Helmet was born in. I saw Helmet as wanting to be like Aerosmith was in 1975, 1976, simple arrangements played intensely. To find musicians for this group, Hamilton posted an ad in the classified section of the Village Voice and eventually met drummer John Stanier, who was a veteran of the hardcore scene in Florida, as well as bassist Henry Bogdan, who was a country music buff. As for their guitarist Peter Mengiday, he met Hamilton through a mutual friend. Hamilton became the chief songwriter of the band, compiling all his ideas for all the instruments and then presenting it to his bandmates. Helmet's demo tape soon found its way to indie label, the Minneapolis-based Amphetamine Reptile Records. It was the head of the label, Tom Hazelmeyer, a former Marine who liked abrasive guitar-driven rock, who signed the group. 6 months after their first rehearsals, the label released the band's first single, titled Born Annoying, in 1989. It was soon followed by their debut album, 1990's Strap It On. The album only cost $2,500 to make and combined Hamilton's noise rock, punk, and metal influences, with Kerrang ranking the record as number 19 for their list of 50 best albums from the year. One of the most notable songs off Strap It On was called FBLA, which stands for Future Business Leaders of America. The lyrics tell the story of how the long road to begging a successful career involves a stop through rock and roll. Hamilton told the Chicago Tribune, "I saw punk rock fans as becoming our FBLA, the same way the pot-smoking hippies of the 60s turned into insurance salesmen. Why can't that youthful intensity be maintained in the business world or in raising a family?" he asked. "Why not seek truth and cathartic experiences all through life?" The track Sinatra was inspired by Hamilton's own personal experience of dating a girl from Hoboken, New Jersey, the home of the late crooner Frank Sinatra. Strap It On went on to be a modest success, selling around 40,000 copies. According to Rolling Stone, the album was also helped by, as and I quote, "good word of mouth, lots of alternative press, and raves from other bands who generated a buzz for Helmet." It wasn't too long after their debut record came out that major labels started to show interest. Hamilton admitted that he was surprised by the major label interest, in the same interview adding, "We never set up to sign with a major. Maybe that's why we ended up getting a fair deal and not getting screwed over. Because we weren't hungry or begging for a major label deal. They all came to us." The band formed at a pivotal point in music history. As Kerrang! Magazine Online described it, they arrived, and I quote, "at the apex of the hair metal explosion and the birth of grunge. They stood out by looking like clean-cut dudes in jeans, t-shirts, and short haircuts, distinctly lacking anything resembling an image." Keep in mind this was the early 90s, and labels were interested in any bands that shared any kind of similarities to Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, and of course Nirvana. There has been varying accounts of exactly how many labels were courting the band, with the number ranging from 7 all the way to nearly 24 by the spring of 91. It was the hype around Nirvana that only helped increase Helmet's price tag, and the band signed an astounding deal with Interscope, who gave them a $1 million advance. Helmet was one of the first big signings to Jimmy Iovine's new outfit, Interscope, which was established 1 year prior. But for Hamilton, he made it clear to Spin Magazine that he'd already developed the band's sound before getting signed, telling the magazine, "They were interested in us before Nirvana even broke. And that's good because we're obviously not it," referring to the next big thing. "I actually had an A&R guy at one label tell us that we were the next U2. At a certain point, it becomes ludicrous." As part of their deal with Interscope, Helmet was given complete creative control, a high royalty rate, touring money, and believe it or not, the use of an outside publicist, something that was pretty uncommon at the time. The band took about 6 months to negotiate a deal with Interscope. Initially, Helmet was worried that there would be a write-off for the label, but by the time they signed the deal in December of 91, Nirvana's Nevermind was making major waves on the charts, hence their big advance. I also want to point out that Hamilton was a lot older than your typical musicians getting signed in the industry. He was 32 around 1991. But some industry observers thought Interscope paid far too much for Helmet, with Hamilton even having to defend the band's deal in the press. He responded, "The bidding war and hype has turned a lot of people off." Adding in a separate interview, "A lot of people don't realize that the money is spread out over 3 albums. The record deal alone isn't enough to live off of in New York. We have to rely on other sources of income like touring to exist. Why should Poison get a good record deal and not the Cows or Jesus Lizard?" As for the change in the music business and the rise of alternative rock, he added to spin, we were driving through Canada and all of a sudden Nirvana comes on the radio in between Paul Abdul and Bryan Adams, and it felt like there was hope in the world. Funny enough, Helmet did end up playing a show with Nirvana when the Pacific Northwest band made its first visit to New York City. By this time, Helmet was getting considerable press coverage for their major label debut. One article even stated, if Paige Hamilton had $1 for every time his band Helmet was called the next Nirvana, he could hire Nirvana for life. Interscope released the band's major label debut, Meantime, in June of '92. Referred to as a thinking man's metal by Guitar World, compared to their first record, this album embraced more melody and catchier choruses. Helmet self-produced Meantime, with all but one track being engineered by Wharton Tears. Steve Albini, famous for his work with indie legends Pixies and the Jesus Lizard, and of course later on Nirvana, engineered the song In the Meantime, which ended up later being remixed by Andy Wallace. However, this caused a bit of controversy. Albini was dissatisfied with the use of triggered samples and more polish. After hearing the mix, Albini, who was in negotiations to produce Nirvana's In Utero, had it written in his contract that Wallace, who also mixed Nirvana's Nevermind, would not be allowed to remix In Utero. The album features an image of a man in a white protective suit shoveling some substance on the ground. The original caption of the photo reads, "Puddler and blast furnace cast house, steel mill, East Chicago, Indiana, 1979. The album contained the band's best-known song, Unsung, which got heavy airplay on MTV and peaked at number 29 on the Modern Rock Tracks chart and number 32 on the Mainstream Rock Tracks chart. In 6 months, the band went from complete obscurity to being splashed on MTV, something that surprised the members. Hamilton told the Baltimore Sun, "It's such a strange thing. I can't stand MTV when I've seen it. It's unbelievable." Hamilton even admitted that he never actually watched any of the band's interviews on the network because he felt that all the behind-the-scenes stuff and interviews took away from the actual music. The video for the track Unsung also ended up on MTV's Beavis and Butthead, with the pair making fun of the band's clean-cut image, saying, "You wouldn't know these guys were cool." It also later showed up on the video game Guitar Hero and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. The second single, The Crushing In the Meantime, not to be confused with the Space Hog song, didn't chart, but it did earn the band a Grammy Award nomination for Best Metal Performance in '92. Other notable tracks include the Firing on All Cylinders You Borrowed, which features some tasty drum fills, and soon won some iconic fans as well, like David Bowie and Phil Anselmo of Pantera. Hamilton was a huge fan of Bowie and even got a chance to play with him as a standing guitarist in 1999 on several tour dates. Helmet soon hit the road, opening for Faith No More and Ministry to support Meantime. But Helmet was never a business-oriented band. Hamilton told the Baltimore Sun, "Being a rock star is a very specific thing. It's a job. It's a job for Bono, Sting, and Axl Rose. Those guys are rock stars. That's what they do. That's not what we do. We are just capable of playing music, and just staying on the outskirts of stardom is preferable to us." He also added that he despised people worshipping rock stars. As for what his music teachers would think about their former students' music, Hamilton added, "Jack Wilkins, my teacher at the Manhattan School of Music, will probably think what we're doing is interesting, but he'll give me hell. And I told another teacher that I was playing a Stratocaster through a Marshall amp, and he said, 'What are you doing? Why would you do that?'" Meantime went on to become the band's most successful record, being certified gold and peaking at number 68 on the Billboard album chart. After recording 2 albums with the band, 1990's Strap It On and 92's Meantime, Mangaday left the group in 1993. Mangaday would end up suing the band over royalty disputes. Paige told Rolling Stone his version of events, admitting, "My take on it is that Peter became resentful of the fact that I was writing songs that 3 of us were capable of playing and he wasn't as capable. A good musical thing can't survive in that kind of vibe." If you guys want me to talk more about Helmet, including their follow-up record 1994's Betty, let me know in the comment section below, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.